Going. Today, as a migrant of South Carolina, I'm delighted to reflect on the great Black migration because I am my history. Black History Month began as a day for remembering important people and events in history of the African diaspora. I am my history. Remembering history is important because it reveals the past. It is our duty to study and learn and to teach our children our history so that we can improve it. A people who do not know their history are fated to repeat it. As an educator, I'm first compelled to take you on a little journey. Can you guys bear with me for a minute? So the Great Migration, also known as the Great Northern Migration, was a movement of more than 6 million plus African Americans out of the rural southern United States between 1916 and 1970. A search for a better life in Chicago and Detroit and Michigan and Pittsburgh and Pennsylvania and right here in the great city of New York. Migrants were driven from their homes by unsatisfactory economic opportunities, harsh segregationist laws. Many headed north, where they took advantage of the need for industrial workers for the first time that arose because of the First World War I. A tenacious people, African Americans. They began to take their lemons and make lemonade, building a new place for themselves in the public life, actively confronting racial justice as well as economic, political, and social challenges to create a Black urban culture that would be an enormous influence in decades. After the Civil War and Reconstructionist era, white supremacy was largely restored across the South. In the 1870s, segregation is known as Jim Crow. Soon became the law of the land. Black lives did not matter. Southern Blacks were forced to make their living working in land due to Black codes and sharecropping systems, which offered little in the way of economic opportunity, especially when a boll weevil epidemic in 1898 caused the crop damage across the South. I'd like to pause on this journey and put a few things in perspective. Following the riots and upheavals and demands and inequality, I am my history. So make no mistake, our ancestors' availability and accessibility changed that narrative, resulting in the migration. World War I broke out in Europe in 1914, industrializing urban areas in the North and Midwest, and a shortage of industrial workers encouraged the African Americans to migrate. With the war production kicking in high gear, recruitees enticed African Americans to come north and the dismay of the white sojourners because they were not happy. The Southerners weren't happy that the African Americans now had an eye on a prize and they were moving north. With the possibility of a better life, by the end of 1919, some 1 million Blacks had left the South. I am my history. In the decades between 1910 and 1920, the Black population of major northern cities grew by large percentages, and this is astounding. So let's talk about it. New York, 66%. Chicago, 148%. Philadelphia, 500%. And in Detroit, 611%. I am my history. And as I stand here now in the Department of Labor, we understand that new workforce changes change the game. Many new arrivals found jobs in factories, slaughterhouses, foundries, and as Valerie said, many of the women became domestic workers. As a result of the housing tensions, sound familiar? Many Blacks ended up creating their own cities, with big cities fostering in the growth of new urban African American culture. Housing crisis, sound familiar? Well, the most prominent example of that happened right here in New York City. Harlem, a formerly all-white neighborhood that by the 1920s housed more than 200,000 African Americans, creating the Harlem Renaissance, which would have an enormous impact on the culture in the era. Black lives matter. Culture matters. You matter. Our history matter. By the 1970s, the Great Migration ended its demographic impact. It was unmistakable. Whereas in 1900, 9 out of every 10 Black Americans lived in the South, 9 out of every 10 Black Americans lived in the South. And 3 out of every 4 lived on farms. By 1970, the South was home to less than half of the country's African Americans, only 25% living in the region's rural. I am my history. I'm my history because I was born in South Carolina, Walterboro, South Carolina to be exact, a plantation state. I graduated from high school at 16 years old. I came to New York City, East New York to be exact, 545 Dumont Avenue between Hinsdale and Williams. I had an idea. As the first in my family to graduate from high school at 16 years old, I had a box of vanilla wafers, a clothes in my back, and an idea that I was going to go to John Jay College of Criminal Justice. Mind you, Valley, I hadn't even applied yet. And being I was the first in my family to graduate, I didn't have a blueprint either. But I was determined that I am my history and I would change my history. Like Valerie, I grew up in the South, and there was no black side, Valerie. We had the poor side and the poorer side. So we all had outhouse where we used, and it was funny when you came and you were explaining to me, when I tell my children about an outhouse, they look at me like I got 10 heads. And don't let me tell them I'm looking at this, I'm gonna look for snakes before I use the bathroom, because then they really know that I have a problem, right? So I say that to you to say I am my history. When I got to New York City, I was supposed to live with my aunt at 545 Dumont. She told me if I came up and I worked that I could live with her. When I got there, 3 hours after being here, she told me I could no longer live with her because someone reported that she was living in NYCHA, that she had other people living with her. And if you guys know a little something about New York City, you know NYCHA don't play that. So they told her they was going to evict her if she moved anyone else into her house. And so at first 3 hours of being here, mind you, I only got the box of vanilla wafers, of clothes in my back, and an idea in my head that I'm going to be here for the journey, right? So my aunt told me I couldn't stay with her. It just so happened another relative, I used to come up during the summer, work a little job and get some clothes. Y'all don't know nothing about that. I had to get on fleek so I can go back down south, and everybody, you came from New York? Yes, all that, right? Yes, I'm fly, don't hate me. Anyway, so I came up, my friend came around the corner, she said, you can stay with me, but you got to pay me $50 a week. Now, mind you, just graduated from high school, didn't have any money. I took my cousin, I said, let's go. Anybody know anything about Pennsylvania Avenue in East New York? I went walking up and down Pennsylvania Avenue, filling out applications at the Wendy's, at the White Castle. I went to the Chinese restaurant. My cousin said, they not gonna hire you. Pump your brakes, that's not the one for you. So we kept on going. I filled my application out at Popeyes. I filled my application out at Modell's, every place that I could possibly put my application in. I got here on a Thursday. I was working on Monday at Popeyes on Stanley in Pennsylvania. That was my first job. Now, I tell you that to tell you that African American people are tenacious people. They migrated to a place that they knew nothing about, with an idea that they were going to have a better life. They created a culture for themselves in places like Harlem and other places, and those cultures grew into so many other things. I saw the trumpet early on, and I was thrilled because that is a part of our history. Our history, not just Black history, our history, because it has expanded over time. So now that I'm in New York City and I'm working at Popeyes, and now I get into John Jay College of Criminal Justice, because the last time I visited my aunt, I saw a billboard. It was a little, you guys probably know, you're on the subway, you see the subway signs, and they say CUNY, and it says criminal justice. I was like, well, I'm going to be the first United States, I'm going to be the first Supreme Court Justice, the Black woman in the United States of America, so I need to go to John Jay, because they said that they have a criminal justice degree. So I applied for John Jay College, got into John Jay College, and as I moving forward, John Jay changed my life. My second year in high school, I repeated a pattern my second year in college, I repeated a pattern that my grandmother and my mother had also repeated. I became pregnant with my daughter my second year in college. But I made a decision that, one, she was not gonna go back down south and stay with the family, because we already know what that is, we're not gonna go there, right? And two, I was taking responsibility for my own destiny and for my own future. John Jay had a daycare center. They let my daughter stay in a daycare center. So from 8 o'clock until 6 o'clock, she was in the daycare center and I was working a job. And at 6 o'clock, I picked her up from the daycare center and I went to John Jay at night. I used to sit her in the back and go, listen, don't make a sound because mama gotta do this. And she did. She sat in the back and she did what she needed to do until I graduated. Not only did I graduate with my BA, I also got an MPA from John Jay, and I have an MBA from another school, and I'm getting ready to get a JD. I'm saying all that to say that we are a tenacious people, and when we have an idea, we make up our mind on what we're going to do, we do it. So not only did I graduate John Jay, I became the billboard of John Jay. So some people say, you look familiar? Yeah, you probably looked up on the subway and you saw the cutie success story and my face was there. And I say that to you to say that I came here because of the billboard and I became the billboard. But it wasn't because of me, it was because of the migration. It was because our ancestors took the time, one, to pray for me, two, to take the migration here, and three, to make a better life, not just for themselves. When you came to New York or Detroit or Chicago, you sent back home to your family. You made sure your family, such as the Caribbean. The Caribbean does the same thing. In Puerto Rico, they do the same thing. I'm telling you this to say that let's not forget our history, because history will repeat itself. So now I go from working at John Jay College, I now am working with the Brooklyn District Attorney, Charles Hines. And the thing about Charles Hines that I enjoyed most is he allowed me to work with young people. At one point I had 135 mentees, and I was teaching them how to silence the violence, and I tagged in other women, and we called ourselves divas, to help these young people. So we had social workers, we had cops, we had everything that they need. We even had nurses in our circle where we taught these kids to be moderators and facilitators, and then we took it to the streets. I remember taking them to Red Hook, New York, if you know anything about Brooklyn. They were like, Aunt Teri, are we still in Brooklyn? Yeah, you're still in Brooklyn. I took them upstate New York, and they were like, where's the pavement? I was like, you're not in concrete jungle, baby. Do you know these kids are now college graduates? One of them really blessed my heart by going back to the DA's office and becoming a community liaison. We are our history, and if we don't know our history, we will repeat our history. So I go from working with Charles Hines as running his community relations bureau. I was invited to submit my resume to Charles Chuck Schumer. Anybody know Chuck? Any Sunday press conferences in here. So I went working for Chuck, but not only was that an opportunity for me, I was the first African American woman to hold that job in this time. And so I've covered these 62 counties that are New York for a long time, empowering and encouraging people to do exactly what I'm doing and giving them access. My business is called Coaxum Connects because I'm connecting you because relationships matter. I went from working for Charles Hines for 6.5 years as his deputy state director. I was invited by the Obama White House to, actually, this is a cute story. You guys are in the federal government, so you understand. You know there's a plum book, right? I didn't. I was invited to submit my resume, and they were like, look in the plum book and pick a job. I'm like, a plum book? What's the plum book? And I looked in the book, and there's this big, thick book of all of these federal jobs. And so I'm picking all these jobs. I got landed a job with Small Business Administration, and this is Martha, my colleague, when we were working in Small Business Administration. I landed a job, thank you. I landed a job at SBA working in Small Business Administration. And so I go from having Our House Gallery in Maria to now working for the president, the first African American president, and being able to visit the White House, being able to visit Puerto Rico. Yes, I did visit Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands. And in that role, some of my colleagues are like, wait, you're covering New York, New Jersey, Puerto Rico, and the Virgin Islands. How does that work? I said, I don't know, but mind your business. Anybody asking questions about why Florida isn't no, you just go ahead. I got this, right? So I went from working with President Obama, which was an amazing job. I was able to still empower and encourage young people. And now I own my own firm. I have an MWBE, Coaxum Connects, connecting you because relationships matter. So I'm a motivational speaker. I'm an instructor at John Jay and Medgar Evers College. I also wrote a book, Peaceful Pondering, A Busy Woman's Guide to Inner Peace. And I encourage young people, I mentor young people, just started a foundation that's going to be the Bill and Melinda Gates of the hood. So what do I mean by that? Coaxum Connects Wellness Foundation. As you see, I look fabulous, yes. Well, let me tell you why. I started on a journey where I looked at myself. I was wearing 240 pounds. And I had to make decisions. 88% of chronic illnesses is because of lifestyle and because of what we eat. And so I made a decision that I would change that, and I've changed that, and I've made a decision I'm going to hit the stage, actually, NPC, bodybuilding, we're not going to go there. Anyway, so I went from 240 pounds to I'm now 160 pounds. And I started seeing that a lot of people started following me on social media. I would go to different events, and they would crush the street. Oh my God, I'm watching you. You motivate me, you encourage me. I said, wait a minute, there's something in this. started the foundation because what the foundation is going to do with the proceeds from all of these journals and the working out and the subscriptions, we're going to put that money back into the neighborhood. So what do I mean by that? We're going to take fifth graders from fifth grade to college and we're going to pay for all of it. They're going to have training in etiquette. They're going to have a mentor. They're going to have a sponsor because everything can't be free. And they're going to have opportunities to go to places that they only dreamed about or read about. That's what my foundation is going to do. And so I'm here. Thank you so much. I'm here as history. I'm here as encouragement. I'm here as empowerment. But more importantly, I'm here because each and every one of you invited me to be here. And I hope to be an inspiration to you now because I am Black history.